Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay as we break down another week of action in a season that is just rapidly racing towards the finish line. I really can't believe there are only 3 more weeks of action left in the regular season after 1 week break. I'm Ethan Sturm, your host for the night, alongside Naresh Adala, and we swear these outfits were not coordinated. How you doing, Naresh?
I am doing wonderful, Ethan. How are you?
Great, excited to talk about some quad ball.
Absolutely.
So we had 3 series, and I'm kind of a sucker for the single week series weekends because you can really kind of focus down on just a few things happening, one per division. My question, as I was kind of watching film this week that I wanted to talk to you is about as someone who's coached on the MLQ level. I would say more recently, but I've never coached on the MLQ level. So period. Is a little bit about defense, right? Because I was watching the South Series, and I was really happy with some of the things I was seeing in terms of rotations in their defenses, ideas, etc. But I've also seen a lot of quad ball this summer where basic defenses aren't being run with very top level rotations. You see hoop zones that maybe don't have the rotation you'd expect them to have, and I think there were highs and lows from the South Series, when I was watching it. So my question for you, because I was talking to a player about this, and I kind of want to see what your take is that if they believe that a lot of teams, put a lot more preparedness into offense, even though defense is the thing that you can kind of control. You can control the movements. You have to offensively, you almost kind of have to respond to what the defense is giving you. Defense, you're controlling, at this level. What
For the start of your question about addressing some of focusing on offense a lot more than defense. So I fall under the thought process of offense in this sport is a lot harder to get right. So for me, when I focus on working with younger players, working with newer players, I focus a lot on teaching offense first because if you can understand positioning, for me, that often I can use that information to then leverage that into defense, where I can say, hey, offensively, think about the space you're trying to take. So defensively, what are you trying to do? Right? You're trying to take away that space from the offensive player. Now it becomes a chess game. So for me, because this might this might sound blasphemous, but for me, I think defense, it's just pure hustle. At the end of the day, defense is hustle. It's about getting to the ball first, and it's about being in the right spots. Offensively, for you, you said, hey, defense dictates how the offense moves. I slightly disagree. For me, offense dictates how defense moves. If you can run a well enough offense in this sport, you should be able to score every single time. You should be able to score with one tap beat. You should be able to score and move the ball because of the rules of a defense. We've gotten to a point where a 2-2 zone has been the meta for nearly 5 years now, which is starting to run its course about how long a meta typically operates in this sport. I remember when I was a freshman, slow balling was the thing. And then we introduced resets. So then slow balling slowly got away from it. Right? That was like about a 3-4 year stretch of like starting off with slow ball, and then we saw it peak at Cup 10. So I think we're right. We're really at a point where if you're playing a 2-2 base 2-2 zone, there's only so many ways you can rotate, and it's gotten to a point where if you're able to run your offense, it doesn't matter how the defense rotates if you can make the passes that you want to make. And for example, this is actually a stat that a South coach actually told me the other day. Against Austin, League City was against a one dodgeball set. Austin gave up 11 scores in 13 possessions. That's pretty much automatic. That's almost elite, unheard of efficiency. Why? Because playing defense in this sport, I'm sorry, playing offense in this sport, if you can do it right, will beat any defense. And I think that's unlike a lot of what we've heard growing up, where defense wins championships and so on and so forth. I think that is true, obviously, but in this sport in particular, if you can run an effective offense, you will nearly every single team will luck into certain stops. But the difference for me is the ability to score when the other team can't.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you look at it that way. And obviously we see these two things very differently. And on my end, I do agree that a perfect offense beats a perfect defense in this sport. But I do think the how good the rules of your defense are dictate how perfect the offense needs to be. You mentioned that League City Austin example, and I don't think that Austin team that weekend was setting the rules that high to make the execution necessary to be that high. The old Baylor hoop zone. The story was that there was a binder somewhere in Waco, Texas, that was just a binder of rotations within that zone. And obviously, they were one of the originators along with Minnesota. And I feel like the Austin hoop zone we had seen on that specific weekend was almost the polar opposite of that. So, I think definitely two different ways of looking at it. I've been a defense first coach for a long time. I've been running one system defense for a very long time, and I figure, hey, if my team has to run transition ball out of that defense, and that's the way we're going to get our points, that's what we have to do. And offense comes along obviously with that. But yeah, I think that's enough of a kind of a setup question. Let's get into talking about these series. We're going to start in the South Division. A sweep that I saw someone define, maybe it was in the comments of the stream, the closest sweep we've ever seen in Major League Quadball. And it really was, end-to-end very close. San Antonio winning 160-130, 145-110, and 165-170. So only a difference of 7 Quadball goals across 3 games, with the catches coming at the right times for San Antonio and the wrong times for League City. Then they caught in game 3. San Antonio caught in game 2. Naresh,
that League City has done that's shown me that they're not one of the better teams in all of MLQ. I think everyone said, hey, the South is probably the most competitive division in the entire league. And I think when a lot of people came into this season thinking, oh, League City, they only won 1 game last year, they might not be that competitive. I know, and again, it was a sweep, but every single game was competitive. Every single game was just always came down to the wire. And I think that's the difference of a really good team. And I think that's the difference of a really young team. If we look at the League City roster, a lot of their quad ball players, they're extremely young. Swathi just graduated from college. Hayden just graduated from college. Andrew Acosta, one of their best players, who we interviewed a few weeks ago, is still just finished their first year of college. So there's a lot of, I mean, again, I can go on, right? Chris Dorsey just graduated college a year and a half ago. So this is an extremely young team, and I think that's what we're seeing this year specifically. It's a lot of growing pains. You can see that they're talented, they're right there, but they're not finishing at the end. They're not executing when it needs to happen, and I think that's where that experience now will only help them going forward. And especially for the quad ball game, even some of the beaters. Like we talk about Baldy, we talk about Carlos Alarba, but Connor Mason came out of this weekend looking pretty solid for me. Again, he's a player in Sam Houston program right now who I think is going into their junior or senior year, an upperclassman, but still, it's a college player playing against the presumed favorite coming out of the South in San Antonio. So I think for me,
yeah, I think one of the things you get with a young growing pains team is that you're not going to get the perfect performance out of every player in every game, right? And I think in this series, the performances just came, at the wrong times. I think out the gates, Hayden Boys, obviously star of the team, the leading scorer in MLQ, I think by 15 goals right now. Admittedly, some teams have played less games than League City, and League City in both games 1, games 2 came out with a lead, but it just felt like in those first 2 games they weren't getting the accompanying performances that we saw in that Austin series, that we saw in that NOLA series. I felt like Maui Hughes didn't have the series that she's been having all season. Acosta, before he got hurt, was dynamic, but wasn't necessarily finishing as well. Wilkinson, who was huge in that Austin series, super clean, wasn't performing the same way. And so I think that's what kind of was just holding them back just a little bit. They weren't getting the goals they quite needed in those first 2 games. Then game 3, Boys goes down with a turned ankle, and then the entire roster starts stepping up. Hangs in that game. They get the catch by Swathi Manam, which I want to get back to in a second. We can talk about that line. And it comes down to first to 4, then first to 3. League City is on game point for 3 offensive possessions, which is the exact same thing. It was shades of the NOLA game 3 all over again, where I think they were on game point for 4 or 5 possessions, and just couldn't execute. All good looks. Like we said, it's a well-drilled team. The first one was just Manham got, I believe, beat right before they threw a pass that Wilkinson finished for what would have been the game winner. Hughes dropped an open pass that I think she would have finished if she got on second possession, and they went a little too early on the third possession, and Daniel Williams was able to make the beat that created no dodgeball the other way. But the other thing I think is worth mentioning about that game three, and I think this can bring us into our talking about San Antonio, is the number one thing I think the Soldados have that the rest of this division doesn't is just insane depth. And I think it showed in that game three because when they got to that, whatever, first to four situation, they put their first line in. And when it was not having the best shift, most teams in first to four, you put your best six players out there and you never falter on that. That's just, and I would say League City, obviously Costa and Boys weren't both not in, but they basically put what they thought was their best team out there that was healthy. San Antonio put in the first line, and then they just got to pop in Miguel Esparza and Luke Langland, a current Team USA player and a former Team USA player, when the first line wasn't quite getting the job done. And, that was got them across the finish line. It's not just in the quad ball game. Their beating depth is deep. I mean, they didn't even have just Markle this weekend. The talent, with their female chasers as well. I mean, Osa Biaba is insane. The possession she's keeping alive right now for this team, the same way she has for UTSA for years. That's what so impressed me so much about the San Antonio team. It's been such a next player up team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely tough, right? When we talk about two things, right? First thing, let me slow down. Let me give San Antonio their props. The ability for, as you said, relying on your star players all the time. Yeah, they'll get you the goals when you need them to, but especially in this sport where we've seen how often we can run our players into the ground during crunch time, the trust that the coaching staff had in what they've developed is by far that needs to be shouted out, because that trust is so important to building confidence for these players in the future, right? Like, you can't just say, hey, go out there, 5 minutes left, or like game three in the champs, now you're getting your most important minutes. We've seen that with a lot of other franchises. That's not going to go over well because it's unfair to the player and it's unfair to the team to put someone out there who might not be prepared for it. But getting those minutes for these players for San Antonio, just huge shout out to them, as well as the coaching staff for being able to do that with those players. With League City, hey, this was for me coming out of, again, this was an 0-3. You lost, you got swept, but coming out of this is you lost your second best player in Andrew in the middle of game two, and you lost your best player, younger players such as Dylan Mendel, coming out of a Texas A&M program who they were not even official last year, right? They showed up and they were joint teaming with Oklahoma State, and they couldn't really put together a program. There was limited numbers, and yet you saw Dylan Mendel now show up playing in a Major League Quadball game and absolutely performing. Giving them the minutes that they need. And now you're seeing some of the quote unquote second string players, the players that are more, that might not be the immediate starters, but you saw them coming in and putting in minutes when they need to. And that sort of minutes, even though it was an 0-3 series loss, those reps and that experience will help this team, even if it's not for this season, going into USQ next summer, going into at League City for the leagues. Let me slow down. Going into USQ next season, and then League City the following summer. So honestly, I was very, very impressed with both teams this weekend. I thought San Antonio came out and did what they should do. They knew they were the best team out there, so they went out there and proved it. And I think League City continues to shock the entire country with how good they've performed and how good they've looked. Oftentimes, we've always said, hey, this is just going to be the Hayden Boys show. And yeah, Hayden has put on 40 goals this season so far, but everyone else has had some form of contribution.
Looks we were seeing out of their 2-2, they weren't playing, a flat 2-2. They had adjustments they were making when the ball was going into the well to cut off passing options. It was very personnel-based 2-2, where based on who had the ball and where they had it, they were making shifts that were making things as hard as possible for the League City Chasers. They got a lot of really free, cheap turnovers that way. And against a well-drilled team like League City, that's saying something, They were showing League City things that they were not ready for, just with quad ball players too, not with like beaters doing anything crazy. So that's really exciting to see. Less enthused by their hoops defense. I know there are factions in the sport who think that like hoops is what you play with one dodgeball. It's something I will never understand. I like I said, I like the tutu better than the hoops, but that's just a personal opinion. But overall, like I said, they came out looking like a sharp team, and they are the favorites at this point in the division. They just need to beat Austin once if they can sweep New Orleans to claim the division title, which would be their first title ever. So I think that's a lot to be said. I did like really quick before we get to the interview. I wanted to go back to that Swathi Manum catch in Game 3. Something I've noticed, because it only really happens in the South Division, is disrespecting defensive seekers in 50-50 situations. So many shots through defensive seekers that just put the flag runner in an impossible situation. Just wait for your team to go on offense so that they can beat out the defensive seeker, and then you can take their shots. Not just in the South Division MLQ. I see it a lot in the Southwestern USQ, more so than I see it happen anywhere else in the country. Just wanted to shout out that moment. Obviously, crazy props to Manum, who catches a lot of flag runners, but in this specific situation, the catch was definitely created by the 50-50 opportunity from a shot through, basically.
I hear you, Ethan, but sometimes you just gotta get good, and that's what Swathi Manum is. Where there's a skill to winning those 50-50s, and you don't have to sell me on Swathi Manum as a seeker. She won games for me in Team India last World Cup. She's won games for UT for her entire career, and she put League City in a position where they had the chance to win in that Game 3. And I think at the end of the day, it's not just, oh, she's a defensive seeker. She's genuinely a bona fide great seeker who picks and chooses her spots and gives her team a chance to win. And so, again, everyone says a lot of things about Swathi. I am one of them. One of them. She is phenomenal. But yeah, like it's not just it's something that needs to be looked at strategically, I think, by a lot of teams, because you saw it in which one? I think it was the Ottawa series, Game 1. I'm pretty sure that was the game I'm thinking about, where it was a 50-50 scenario. Kellen Cupid and the Ottawa Seeker both go in, and they're in a 50-50 scenario, and unfortunately, I think Kellen gets beat out, and now flag runner turns, Ottawa Seeker catches. That's the sort of situations we want to avoid when you're trying to get proper flag runner on pitch play drilled and practiced. So that sort of thing is something that no team is good enough at the where they're out. That's flag runner on pitch is always the most chaotic, and that's the thing where people need to be drilled as much as they can to be able to counter any scenario that they face.
For sure. And I mean, honestly, the higher your scattering report is on Swathi, the more you shouldn't be taking those shots, and you should just wait for a beater to come clear out.
Absolutely.
But yeah. So let's get into our first interview of the night, and we're going to be talking to the co-head coach of the San Antonio Soldados, David Aviat. David, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
All right, thanks, Ethan. Thanks, Naresh. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Of course. So I want to kind of start at the beginning of the season. You and Milena taking over this team, kind of coming off of obviously still a very solid season, but top to bottom, just by the numbers, the weakest San Antonio season. You guys only I think it's the first time you ever failed to make the semifinals as a franchise, and not very competitive in that quarterfinal. Players coming in, players coming out, people coming from a ton of different teams, both club and college. What was kind of your guys' mindset to kind of start writing this ship for this program?
The biggest thing for us was just making sure that we, kept our culture as a team, making sure that we really taking all the pieces that we had and meshing them together. Chemistry gained that composure, and it's really helped us go forward.
Obviously, you along with a lot of the players you had last year, you had players like Miguel Esparza and Daniel Williams rejoining the team. Obviously, veteran club players, Team USA players. As a coach, how has it been kind of working them back into the program? What's that experience been like working with them?
They're great, honestly, especially when, we don't always have, we're youthful players. We don't have like the best drill ideas or the most outstanding concepts, right? And with their level of talent and their levels of experience, they've helped us find new ways to coach people or find new ways to make ideas stick. And honestly, they've just been a tremendous help. Without them, I think it would have taken us a little bit longer to kind of move along the right track. But now, like I said, with that previous meshing, right, the new culture that we have together as a team, this bonding is great. And I'm just super thankful to have them along.
So you guys kind of get that scare right off the bat in that KC series. You have to come back and win that series. You're watching, League City beat Austin 2-1 a couple weeks ago. Talk to us about kind of the competitiveness of the South this year and kind of what it's been like coaching within that, scouting within that, making sure your team stays focused for every game within that.
Oh yeah, going into the season, I knew it was going to be really competitive, and me personally, I was a big pro League City person. I've seen these people grow and grow and grow, and I just knew this season they were going to be pushing really hard, and hopefully they've been proving me right because the numbers prove it, right? But it's just honestly been film study after film study after film study. Everyone's really dedicated. Everyone seems really bought into this team this year. Everyone's looking to improve. One person I can name right off the bat doesn't get a lot of playing time, sorry, but Isaac Sultanfuss. He's one of the most dedicated players I know. He's one of the favorite people I have to coach. Always looking to improve, always going to be better than the person he was 10 seconds ago. And I just feel like that is a baseline for this team. Everyone's wanting to put in that extra bit of work, and not just for us. You can see it across the South Division. League City's putting in extra work. More teams are having more than just like our typical one practice a week, and it's just you've really seen it elevate all the levels of play here.
So, I mentioned that comeback against KC, and obviously you managed to finish the game in Game 3 against League City. Not as big of a comeback by any means. You guys were only down a goal or two.
Because in those moments where it is super close like that, that's when we're not super concerned for some reason. I just think a lot of our players, or a lot of our players, really have that dog in them, I guess you could say. It's when we see that score, that's when we say, okay, it's takeover time. We're done. We're gonna get it done. We got to end this now. Whereas throughout like early mid game, if it starts creeping up on us or we have like a little bit of a deficit, that's where we're more a little bit antsy, chirpy, and you could probably hear it from the live streaming game too, against League City, but going back to that composure, we really rally together. And especially when you have such great players, experience, like Miguel was on the sideline and he was like, all right, no, we're not losing. We're going to win this right now. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it, and just this team is just great with the energy. They're great in our cohesion. And I feel like our sideline energy is a big part of why we're so successful this year.
So you might have heard us mention when we were talking about it, the shift change you guys made down the stretch in Game 3. We don't see a ton of shift changes in those scenarios. That come from the coaching staff? Was that players on the field voicing tiredness? What were you guys seeing in that moment?
It's a little bit of both. I feel like this year we're really good about listening to our players and taking their feedback as well. I'm not going to mention any names, but one player was just like, hey, I feel like we're doing really good defensively, but offensively, we just can't seem to get it done right now. We need to change something. And us as a coaching staff, we took that and we're like, okay, let's just make some adjustments here. Let's feed the hot hand. Luke Langley, Miguel, right? They were doing amazing that series. I think Luke had 12 goals on the series. Just a really hot hand. We knew they were going to get it done. And especially when you have key pieces like Alyssa Viava and Catherine Hay, right? Like they're always in the right spot, always in the right position, always looking to draw that attention and free everybody up. So sure, you could say that was us adjusting things as well, but more importantly, it's us listening to our players and actually taking in what they have to say.
So you guys are the final undefeated team in MLQ this year. Obviously, you've had a chance, I'm sure, as a coaching staff to review teams that are going to come out of the top of the other divisions like Chicago and New York. What are your guys' expectations right now at this point in the season? You still have your matchup with Austin coming up. You obviously have MLQ champs coming up. What are the goals? What success look for the San Antonio Soldados this year?
Success, obviously, we want to take the number one in the division. We'd like to remain undefeated if possible. But more importantly, we're just looking for growth. We're looking for improvement, rapid improvement. We just want to be the best as possible going into champs. Sure, we could sweep every team from here on out. We could, go undefeated, whatever. But that doesn't matter if you make it a champs and you lose day one or, early day two. So we just want to make sure that we're going to be prepared enough to go all the way to the end. And like I said before, these kids, these people, they're all ready for it. They're putting in the effort. They're putting in the work. We're having multiple film sessions a week, right? Multiple practices. We are hungry for this and we want this. We will be at finals.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. Best of luck the rest of the way. Best of luck in your Austin series as well as at MLQ Champs. We'll be watching.
Thank you all, and you have a great night.
And just before we jump to the next series, just to lay out the stakes now in the South Division, San Antonio sits at 6-0. Austin is 7-2. If San Antonio does sweep NOLA, they would only need to win a single game against Austin. If they drop basically any number of games against NOLA besides 0, they would have to win the series against Austin to win the South Division. At the bottom of the South Division, it's going to be KC currently at 0-9, League City at 3-6. They will play the last week of the season in KC. KC will have to sweep League City to grab the 4th spot out of the division. If they drop even one game, KC will be eliminated. League City can still jump up higher than 4th in the division, depending on how many games they win against KC. It's the stakes as things stand here in the South Division. We're going to jump over to the East Division here, where stakes are a little bit more clear-cut at this point in the season. And we do have a series between the New York Titans and the Ottawa Black Bears. Titans win pretty convincingly across the board, 260-75, 215-20, 225-10. Naresh, we talked a lot in the first couple times we've talked about New York this year about how we want to see the depth, we want to see the youth. New York went young this series. They didn't carry a lot of their veteran players. They still won convincingly, and they got some big contributions out of those young players. What did you see from New York and this young roster?
Yeah, so I was very happy at the fact that certain players just, I mean, hey, Tate K said, hey, I'm not going to roster myself because I believe in my team, and didn't roster Devin Lee, who we've both talked about how great those two beaters are. Didn't roster JJ, great beaters, great beater, great quad ball player. And then there were other players that might not have been available because of vacation, so on and so forth. But the sheer fact that he said, hey, I'm not going to roster myself and let y'all cook is something that really is a confidence builder for any team, right? When your head coach can say, hey, I'm not going to roster myself, y'all need to do the work now to be able to get these wins. I think that's important for any team, and I think the players rewarded him for it. We saw players, again, we talked about Ryan Leary and Amir Rivera Sila, who've both popped off in this early MLQ season, but also a name that has kind of gotten its own cult-like following amongst the MQC is Shakti Kodaswaran, who was recently given, right, accepted the position for DA earlier today. That was announced. So I think with players like that who are just popping out of the MQC, coming back to the jersey, playing for the Titans, really showcases how much talent this Titans team has, especially at the younger quote unquote levels age wise. So I'm very excited to see how they continue going forward and how they play into this Titans plan, the Titan plans going into Charlotte in a few weeks, and then Champs a month from now.
Yeah, you mentioned the MQC. Those 3 players, 3 of the 4 top scorers in the series. Frank Minson was the other. James Liu out of the Middlebury program was also up there on the scoring charts. We've seen Leary and Rivera Sila in a lot of games already this season. We didn't see Kodaswaran all that much in the Boston series. What do you think we will see more Kodaswaran down the stretch? We've seen this New York team not play very deep. Do you think this is an opportunity for them at leading score in the series, 10 goals, to kind of earn that spot as things get tighter down the stretch?
Yeah, so I am a huge Shakti Kodaswaran fan. I've been a fan of his since his first year playing, which was the 2021-2022 season. No, 2022-2023 season. Watching him play that first year was absolutely fantastic. And he's actually from my hometown. He went to my high school. Well, or no, he would have gone to my high school, but he went to a better technical school. So because he's smart. But no, he's one of my favorite players. Being able to coach him and actually see him work with Team India last summer was absolutely fantastic. And I've been wanting him to play Titans for so long now that the fact that he's actually here with the Titans this summer, I'm very excited to see how he can continue to grow as a player, because he is unafraid of contact. And I think the best example of was when in the Boston series, you saw Shakti take a hit from Peter Lawrence, got drilled to the ground, but still was able to get the pass off to Frank Minson for the score. That sort of high IQ play, that sort of toughness is something that Shakti brings in spades, and I'm very excited to see how he can continue to provide that energy, that calmness, that toughness for this Titans team. Also, real quick, Jason Wu, shout out to him, who was also MQC as you said, but also got uh, accepted into DA earlier today as well. So I didn't want to not include Jason Wu in that. So shout out to you, Jason. And speaking of Jason, I thought he was someone else that we didn't really get to see a lot of because this was the first series that he was rostered for. I was very, very impressed with his movements. I saw him play against BU at qualifiers this past season, and you could tell he was the best player on Middlebury. One of the best players quadball wise, like you could tell he was built different. But watching him do this at the MLQ level, watching him do this against other like high level competition, I was very impressed with his movements. Again, this might sound bad, and I apologize in advance. But again, against Ottawa, short rostered, might not be there athletically. Jason Wu proved that it wasn't just against a weaker opponent. His movements, the way he was operating, the way the spaces he was filling, looked very comfortable and looked very competent. So I'm very excited to see what he can do for this team going forward. But yeah, I mean, overall, this youth that
this was with Kay not playing and Lee not playing. This is almost a tryout for who's going to be filling those minutes. What did you see from the rest of this beater core?
Yeah, I mean, again, this goes back into the idea of, oh, we're playing Ottawa, their beaters might not be able to compete against ours. I think that was a lot of the talking points going into this series for a lot of people, but actually being there, I thought Ottawa beaters were able to hold their own for spurts, right? Like again, they only showed up with 11 or 12 people, but the fact that Ottawa beaters were able to go out there and show in spurts that they could handle or even outplay certain Titan beaters, that's where you're now looking at it like, wait, what's going on? And I think a large part of that was just because it almost felt like they took it for granted, if that makes sense. It almost felt like they were entitled to, oh, I know I'm going to make the beat, so I'm going to throw it maybe not as hard, or I'm going to throw it into the gut of the Ottawa beater. Just these little fundamental mistakes that you're taught not to do as a beater. They were making those mistakes, and they were missing way too many close range beats for any. Doesn't matter who you're playing. If you're going to throw away dodgeballs, you're not going to win that game. And again, they're in a position where they were playing a weaker team where they can get away with those type of mistakes. But that sort of behavior, that sort of habits, can't be something that they continue to do essentially when they gets to champs, because this team talent wise can match anyone if not outplay anyone. But the only thing right now is you don't want to beat yourself by making these mental mistakes, by making unnecessary throws, throwing dodgeballs away. There were a number of times where they just lost control because they were trying to make a play when it wasn't there, right? And that's part of being a good team. You have to know, you have to pick and choose your spots. You have to be able to say, hey, I know I can dominate this team and I might be able to get away with mistakes because I'm more athletic than them. But is that the right play? Is that the right decision? And I think that's where, when they watch the film back, which I think every team should, like they should just not let me sit on. They should watch it back even though it was a blowout, because there were a lot of mistakes that were made that could be fixed. Just because there was a blowout, just because it was a wide range in score disparity, doesn't mean there are not things to learn from this game. It's for me like another thing. If we're gonna be honest, like their half court still didn't look all that good until game three, right? But in game three, when they were taking spaces, making the open pass, that's when New York looked good. And it's clear.
You mentioned, those sparks in the beater game. What were you seeing from those players?
Absolutely. I think first name to really bring up is Emily Naftel. Canadian player. I know a lot of Americans might not recognize the name immediately, but what they're doing is absolutely insane. I think they are tied for second, or no, not tied. They are the second most drives played in all of MLQ. That's nuts for a team that only is bringing 11 players, and even then, they had a super series, which means they were playing 6 games in the span of 2 days. Emily played, I think, let me bring it up really quickly. Emily has played 179 drives. That's nuts, right? And I think Emily, and again, that's where you might look at these numbers and say, hey, they doesn't look all that great. Yeah, when you're playing that many drives and you're obviously playing tougher competition, it's not going to look great. But Emily, as a head coach, as the leader of the team, has really held it down for Ottawa, and I think the energy that they bring is off the charts. And huge fan of them as a player and as a leader. But someone I came away from this weekend that I'm extremely high on, not only because I hung out with them after on Saturday and actually got to meet them, but uh, Zach Reichen was someone that genuinely looked good on Saturday. And again, I know that's all relative because you look at the stats, you look at the numbers, you're like, what are you talking about? But in terms of how they looked, how he looked on the field, he looked like he belonged on the field. And I think that's the eye test, especially if you can give Zach a team where they're able to make a bit more passes, you're able to catch and finish a bit better, make those fundamental passing and throwing. I think you'll see that a lot of this Ottawa team strategically they can match against anyone in MLQ. The fundamentals is where I'm wanting more out of them, and specifically with Zach, I thought for a player who's going to his second year in MLQ, genuinely impressed me, and I'm very excited to see what Zach can do going forward.
Yeah, and obviously beater stats are always going to be somewhat connected to the full team performance, especially stats like plus minus. But if you look at the rates, their stats are better across the board than a lot of the other beaters on the squad. Specifically, the team gets a little bit more done offensively while they're on the pitch. And you mentioned Naftel. Naftel also a converted chaser on top of everything else. Kind of doing everything for their team in a similar way to Moya Sousa is doing as one of the head coaches of San Antonio. Has obviously been beating for some time along with chasing, but was originally a chaser. So players kind of making the strides they need to make, and a small squad, but I think the fight has been there this season, and I think matched up against I think the across the board favorites. I don't 100% know what the current power rankings say, but at least one of the favorites in the country to win this season while traveling with a short roster on a holiday weekend, arguably in both countries. Happy Canada Day to those who watch. A tall task, but I think things to hang their hat on. This is an extremely young team, even by Ottawa standards. A lot of that old guard is gone. Alex Naftel on the roster for the season, not on the roster this weekend. A lot of these young Carleton players are kind of taking those steps. And hey, every single game is an experience that they can take back to their next college season and into future MLQ season. So hopefully it's something for this program to be building on.
Absolutely, and I think a quick shout out. Specifically, we said, "Hey, Alex Naftel wasn't here." Um, it's definitely tough to be able to be in a situation where you are short rostered, but the energy that I think their name is Max Geiler played with a ton of energy and was really the offensive force for a lot of what they were trying to do this weekend. And I did want to throw another shout out to Alexander Ravoche, who was the seeker that I was talking about earlier when they were doing the Kellen Cupid 50-50 shot. Who would have thought that coming into this summer, we're almost 9 games into the season for most teams. Ottawa has a positive flag runner on pitch record. That's impressive for any team. I think they are 5-3-1. That's a very great record because I'm looking at these standings and a lot of teams are below 500 when it comes to catching the flag. And so there's something here for this Ottawa team, and I'm very excited to see what they can do and build off of going into their last 3 games against Boston in a few weeks, and obviously going into their QC season, and then back again with Ottawa next year.
Awesome. Yeah. So with that said, let's go into our second interview of the night. We're going to talk to beater from the Ottawa Black Bears, Zach Reichen. Zach, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, you are one of those, younger Carleton players we talked about. So, kind of take us through your kind of introduction to, MLQ. Back in my day, to age myself, we got to play Canadians all the time. So there was a lot more, overlap. But now, unless you're really playing on an MLQ team or making Team Canada and getting to play American players, at the international level, there's not as many of those opportunities. So what's that experience kind of been like for you this summer?
So the introduction was crazy because it was last year we got to play Washington at home, and I was told, oh, you're going to face all these very scary people who are going to be very good. And then we did pretty well. I remember, I think it was game 2 Washington last year. We went up 5-0 to start the game. And then I got to go to the Super Series in New York, and we saw the scary people that we were told about. But it was a ton of fun, especially getting to play with, like, I got to play with Alex throughout the year, and he was like, oh, you're coming to Ottawa. You're coming to play for Black Bears. And then to play with all these amazing people from Montreal and also from the Ottawa team, it was a great time. And then always good vibes. That's what you got to do when you're playing on this team.
So you guys obviously kind of drew a really tricky schedule this year in that you had to go to the Super Series in arguably the hottest place in the Eastern Division. Play with a small roster, and you have to travel again down to New York. You get your home series very late in the season, whereas you got one early in the season last year. How's kind of the team been able to kind of keep the mentality positive, in these really tough circumstances that the schedule kind of threw you so far this year?
It's been a lot of us supporting each other, like especially through people falling and getting hurt. We've all been there for each other, taking subs whenever needed for whoever needs it. There has been a very lack of lines this year, and a very big thing for our team has been the ice bucket. In Washington, we went and bought a garbage bin, filled it with ice and water, and post games, we've been standing in it. During the game, we're dunking our head in it. We're putting headbands, arm sleeves, anything you can find, you're throwing it in there and making sure you're keeping yourself cool.
Awesome. So, you heard us talk a lot about Emily and kind of the things she's done for this team, both, as a coach, as a player, switching positions. What has she kind of brought to this team this season as your head coach?
Oh, Em has been amazing as a head coach. She has really brought together the flow of us all working more in unity, especially with our chasers, and making sure our beaters aren't going off first and our chasers being left behind to be easily pressed. Making sure we're focusing on a lot more of getting it done and making sure we make it at least past half before something crazy happens.
I think people were expecting coming into it. Did you guys surprise yourselves at all? Is it something that you were very confident kind of performance you could put in at that series? And what did that performance mean for the team?
That performance meant so much to us. A lot of us were very confident that we could get something done until we saw our roster size, and then we were a lot less confident. But we knew we were going to go out there and do our best. We were hoping to take a game, weren't able to pull it off, but we all came out of that with we can really play. We can stay at that level. I know Ugo, Aya, Naomi, some of our rookies for this year were absolutely learned so much and brought that especially to the New York series this week.
Awesome. Kind of, this year being your second year with the team, what has it kind of meant in terms of, you mentioned all these younger players, a lot of these Carleton players. What have you been able to bring back to your teams, in Q Canada, and kind of what's that meant for helping to strengthen those programs as well?
We were able to bring, at least to Carleton this past year, a lot of more aggressiveness. We learned a lot from New York and Boston last year about the way a beater can play and what they can do on the field. And we brought it to Carleton this year, and we're able to end up second in the league, end up pulling up silver. And especially through that, our chasers were also able to use those fast breaks, use all of that to do very well. And hopefully we'll have more of them next year to join MLQ.
So this year, Boston travels to you for you guys' last series of the season. Maybe not the biggest quadball team, maybe not those monsters you talk about from New York, but I mean, that beater core is kind of the monsters in their own way. As a beater, are you looking forward to facing off against all those, Team USA or at least Team USA level beaters for a nice weekend at home?
Oh, I'm ridiculously excited. Me and I'm already decided we're gonna. They don't get BS. We've decided it totally. It's completely gonna happen
now. Yeah, just a fun thing. Never, nobody says it in the U.S. But awesome. Yeah. But yeah, so Zach, one series ago, how would you guys kind of sum up the series? And obviously, you're not getting the results in terms of wins, but what level of success do you guys feel like you've had over the course of these 9 games so far?
From everything I've heard from my team and from me personally, we've had tremendous success. We are so happy with how we've played. We've been short rostered in immense heat, and we're all working so hard. And people have been learning so much. Like, I'm so happy with Ugo. He went from starting in December to learning the entire game before nationals, and then going into MLQ as his second ever tournament, and then absolutely killing it. All of our rookies have learned so much, and even our vets have learned more how to play the game and how to keep a cool head while playing the game. And yeah, we feel like we've had a very productive season and ready to come back next season even stronger.
Awesome. Well, Zach, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. We're looking forward to watching you guys play your last series this season against Boston. And best of luck with your college team as well. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys again stronger than ever next year.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, so let's go to our last series of the weekend. A series that kind of felt had similar, I guess, tones to the series we just talked about in the East Division, with Chicago, the presumptive favorites in the North Division, sweeping Cleveland 265-40, 255-30, and 295-20. The comprehensive win we expect from Chicago. And I really think it kind of, to me at least, when we talk about Chicago, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit throughout the year, what separates them for me from other top teams is the way they're so good at using a press to generate advantages. Obviously, when the mismatch is like this, it creates a giant advantage. But even when you think about a series like their Minneapolis series or their Detroit series, the Minneapolis series, Minneapolis couldn't create offense. Chicago was able to create a lot of it off of their press in the half court as well, but a lot of it off their press. In the Detroit series, I feel like the standing image of that series was Leo Freed just chucking a ball to nobody as the press was coming in them again. I think he probably had double-digit turnovers in that series. So what did you think of the Chicago performance and the Chicago performance to date this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Chicago, it's always not always. I think last year was when they moved into Chicago from being in Indianapolis for so long, and I think that change also highlighted the fact that this is a new team, just strategically, personnel. They've shown that they can compete against anyone, whether it's their USQ counterpart with Boom Train, but specifically with Chicago, the biggest thing that I'm impressed by, and I have been impressed by since last year, is the fact that every single person that joins their program goes out there and they look competitive against anyone. That is a very, very difficult thing to achieve in such a short time with MLQ. Being able to get everyone on the same page, having come from different programs, different experience levels, that's a very difficult thing. And I think every single person I saw out there this past weekend looked competitive. And it wasn't just when they were running their press. I saw George Blackwell, who is coming off of a great run with Columbia, Chicago, I'm pretty sure, this USQ this season. He looks fast. Like, we talk athleticism, his athleticism, just, you can see it on film. His speed is game breaking. His athleticism is game breaking. So the fact that he's a first year MLQ player, that's exciting. The fact that Nivas Jairam is going into his second full year of chasing for them is very exciting. The fact that they now have Melanie Rolfe chasing for them, who continues to add to the monstrous development that they've been able to have with their women and gender minority players, phenomenal, right? Like, and then we go into newly appointed Team USA player Ali Manzella, who was there this past weekend, just continuing to show everyone how it's done. And I think everyone, a name that we've all talked about since her college years, was Dara Guyman, right? We saw her absolutely go out there and be incorporated into this system like nothing has changed. So I think those are just a few players that I wanted to talk about, but every single person on this roster goes out there and they compete at a high level, and I think that's what I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
You got it, Ethan.
Yeah. Yeah, and the first thing I mentioned, was the high press, and that the kind of at the core of that is someone who's been an assistant coach for this team the last 2 years, Ted Walters. The other thing that I think you were kind of touching on is the precision and the efficacy of this team. And I think that's very much comes from their head coach in Kennedy Murphy and the way she approaches the game. And when you look at these stats, Matt Troy had 11 goals and 5 assists on 0 turnovers. Nivas Jairam had 10 goals and 3 assists on 1 turnover. Digman, 9 goals and 5 assists on 0 turnovers. Zoc, 9 goals, 3 assists on 0 turnovers. Manzella, 7 goals on 0 turnovers. Yes, this was a heavy favorite team in this game, but New York's stats are not that clean when it comes to turnovers. There's no real company in the South because of how even the division is, but just goes to say, like, other teams, even in games that they're winning, throw the ball away sometimes, and it's just the sheer cleanness of this team. We arguably we didn't get in week 1, and I think it goes to your point that this team is clearly working and practicing and trying to get better week in, week out, because that Detroit series was so far and away their worst series of the season. Also played in the pouring rain, which I'm sure hurts efficacy. But better and better each game. And yes, you could argue Detroit's the second best team in the division. Also, that might be why it was their worst series. But I think just how all-consuming this team has become is starting to look more like those dominant franchises of the past, like those prime Austin years in terms of the all-consuming dominance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going into a point that you mentioned earlier, Ethan, was the efficiency of their beaters has been electric to watch. I think there were points where their plus minuses are off the charts, but I think the impact of Noyes Ostra has had on this team, only played, I think, 10 or so drives, absolutely popped off in the minutes that they got. Tad Walters beating with multiple different players. I'm pretty sure this was the first time we saw Camila Rodriguez get playtime, Ojas Turikar get playtime, Maverick Wolf get playtime. Some of these younger players were able to be incorporated into the system that they want to run, similar to what we spoke about in New York even just an hour ago. The ability to let their kids play is something that is very important because we saw what youth can do at champs. I mean, you could ask me. Nivas Jairam single-handedly beat us in the last 10 seconds of that game 3 against Chicago last year. So I think the fact that this team has even more talent, even more just excitement coming out of their program is very cool to see. So yeah, I mean, just the one last thing before we obviously need to move on, but I'm very excited to see what they can do with their flag runner on pitch.
This will be long, so I want your one-word answer. The 3 teams we saw this weekend, who's the favorite for MLQ championship?
Right now, Chicago.
Okay, fair enough. So let's go over to the Cleveland side. And obviously a bit of one-sided series, but when we're looking for those high points from Cleveland, what did you like from this team?
Yeah, I thought this was a team that was definitely hustling when they needed to. Not even when they needed to. That might sound mean or bad. They were doing their best to get the looks that they wanted, and I think that's important, right? Especially against a team that's getting high pressed. Your decision making, your ability to just read and react, it gets shrunk even more. And I think their ability to just say, "Hey, sometimes we don't have it. Let's just throw it away," and that's honestly the best play there is. But then other times their ability to read and react. And I know the final score wasn't indicative of how them, from what I saw a lot of with Cleveland, was similar to the Ottawa team that we talked about how young they were, similar to even League City about how just experience helps. I think that's where Cleveland is as well. We saw a lot of scenarios for them. Me specifically, I saw a scenario where their beaters, honestly, their points outplayed Chicago's beaters. But then they didn't make the extra tap to take out a passing option, which then turned into a backdoor cut leading to a goal, right? And those type of scenarios, especially when you have control, you need to be able to make those tap beats. You need to be able to make those early decision plays to make it as difficult as possible for Chicago to operate on offense. And I think that sort of thing is something you can fix during film sessions, where you can say, "Hey, I should have made that beat here." So that way, when we do press, that person is no longer a passing option. And I think something else chaser-wise is if you don't have, just because you have a no dodgeball look, doesn't mean you need to rush the play. slow it down at that point. There's no dodgeballs. Get your beaters involved. Get a few taps. Find the open lane, and then you drive and dunk, drive and dish. They tried to run a multiple. Let me slow down. They tried to run against a set defense, quote unquote, that Chicago had set up, and that's where they either ran the ball into a defender, they couldn't make the hit. I'm sorry, they couldn't fight through the hit, and so that's something where they'll have to definitely work to improve on. But overall, just with what this team came out with a lot of the with how young this team honestly is, this is a team that's going to continue to grow. So that's where I was happy with a lot of some of the process that they were playing with, and even if the outcome wasn't there, I'm okay with what they were able to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and obviously there's some rock and a hard place to it when you kind of mention maybe pushing the tempo in a situation that might not be advantageous. I mean, on average, less than a dodgeball possession, so tricky spot. But you mentioned some high points in the dodgeball game. Most of the goals were scored with Peter Brechting and Lacey Hetchman on the pitch. Brechting, a converted quadball player, Hutchman, a long-time veteran who also has managed this team in the past. So, just seeing players, kind of step up into roles and kind of create these opportunities, letting some of these younger players step up in the quadball game in the meantime and, get those moments, get a few goals here and there, something to build on. This I assume is not the series that this team necessarily had circled as, the series they were looking to, to make huge waves in, but obviously some high moments there to kind of build on against again what is just can be really such an all-encompassing beater core that can really just swallow you whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's jump into our last interview of the night, and let's talk to head coach of the Cleveland Riff, Jack Mosley. Jack, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Hi, happy to be here.
Awesome. So I kind of want to talk to you about your team's goals and kind of what you guys are seeing coming into this season. Some things are changing. You're incorporating a little bit from the Now the Funk Rochester program, which a lot of you guys have experience with. You guys are coming off of I'd say at least in recent history of Cleveland, a solid season last season. What were kind of your goals and what were you guys looking to achieve this summer?
Yeah, Naresh hit the nail on the head a couple minutes ago when he said process. The goal has really been we want to teach process. The results might not be pretty because we are a very young team, but it's all about development. It's all about getting better. When we start to do things smartly, eventually we're going to do things well. That's been the goal. We really want to teach people.
Awesome. And, halfway through your year at this point, you've got your Super Series coming up. How do you guys feel you succeeded in that goal, as kind of a new coaching staff, newly organized?
I think there's definitely some great things we've seen. A lot of young players. Several players have never played an official USQ game or MLQ game. Adam Thompson, I think, has like half a dozen goals or so. Never played an official game. Absolute dog. Like Will Kozak, Michael Jones, a bunch of like great young players that we're seeing exciting things from.
Something we talked about, I want to say with Chicago, when we were interviewing Kennedy a couple of weeks ago, was just that this North Division is so different than the North Division that we saw maybe 3-4 years ago in terms of top end talent, in terms of depth as well across the board. You're playing these teams, like a Chicago, like a Toronto. Are you guys kind of feeling that as well, that like this North Division is not what the division used to be?
Yeah, I mean, when I first joined the North Division, I was playing in Rochester with Bassam and Sully and Cody Kiefer and all those people, and we only played East Division teams, and then we had to play Minneapolis. But like this is definitely a much improved division. Detroit is way better than they were a couple years ago. Minneapolis is always good. Chicago is insane. Like it's really easy to play down to an opponent sometimes, and Chicago didn't do that at all. They were super crisp all game, like single-digit turnovers, something insane like that. So this is a very good division.
For sure. So we were kind of talking about Brechting making the switch to the beater game, and the contributions he was able to make throughout the series as they were, and obviously a series that wasn't necessarily the most competitive top to bottom. What has he kind of added for you guys, on that side of the ball?
P is a fantastic coach and a fantastic leader. Always on the sideline, he's coaching people on. He's coaching people on the field also at the same time. Like, we're gonna go back and watch the film as a team. You can hear him shouting, "Press, press, press."
Kind of big weekend events.
Absolutely, yeah. We might not have the experience and the athleticism of some other teams, but we're gonna go out there and fight. So if teams look past us, we will be, I think, sneakily competitive. We're looking forward to that.
I know you're kind of newer to Cleveland, in terms of total years played for them, but I feel like Cleveland Detroit's always kind of been a fun little rivalry. There's a lot of overlap, people who play together on club teams and whatnot. What does that series tend to mean for the team? Is that something you guys get up a little extra for usually?
Yeah, that one's been circled in the calendar all year long. We played them last year. We were 1 goal away from beating them in the series, and then we would have swept Rochester, I'm pretty sure. So we're looking forward to playing Detroit. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, with that series, obviously still very much an opportunity to qualify for MLQ championships. But, what would you consider a successful goal when it's September 1st and you're looking back at the season that was?
I think we want to look back and see that we've improved over the summer. Regardless of results, we want to see better process than what we started with. We want to grow college teams. Bowling Green is going to be back next year. Case Western is going to have their first official year next year. Even that, I think, is a big step forward for quadball in the whole Ohio area. So I think we're pretty optimistic about the way things are going.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that one step further. That's a big step forward for quadball as a sport. I mean, it's not something
we're super excited.
Yeah, the fact that this program can be helping to kind of build those opportunities is so exciting and optimistic. Well, Jack, I hope you do see that growth throughout the year, and we are looking no MLQ play. It was the international break that wasn't as things were concerned, but the weekend that's coming up in 2 weeks is absolutely loaded and is going to be one of, if not the weekend of the season. Boston and Washington will be playing basically for second place in the East Division. Austin and San Antonio will be playing for first place, most likely, in the South Division. And then in the North Super Series, as we were just talking about, we'll have Detroit and Minneapolis largely playing for second place in that division. Only 3 weeks of quad ball left in the regular season, but there's still so much to play for. It's going to be absolutely insane. We hope you join. We hope you keep watching on the MLQ Network. We want to shout out the Take Back the Pitch, our Monday fantasy tournament for female and gender non-conforming players. Registration has been extended to Friday. We hope you sign up. It's always a super fun event. I love reffing it. The play is always really exciting. It's fun to see all those players stepping up. Definitely consider it. Like I said, that'll be the Monday After Champs, and you can sign up until Friday. But yeah, that's going to do it for us here. For myself, Naresh, and our producer, Joey Shea, we thank you for your time for watching. We hope you have a great week off, and best of luck to all the teams playing in a couple weeks. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody. Good night.